One of the primary plotlines of ReZero is all about the royal selection. About a year before the start of the main story, a mysterious illness wiped out the entire royal bloodline of the nation known as the Dragon Kingdom of Lagunica. The dragon, which the king had a covenant with, brought out the Dragon History Stone, a large slab that the royal family used to tell the future of the nation, following its instructions to shape the nation. After the death of the royal family, the stone was updated to include the initiation of the royal selection, in which 5 people are selected to run for the spot of the new king of Lagunica. This video will act as an analysis and a combing through of Lagunica's political standing, as well as examining all of the royal candidates individually through the lens of the story. Starting with Arc 3, or Season 1's introduction of all of the candidates and where we stand, then a brief journey into Arc 4 or Season 2, then we will be diving into Arc 5 and 6, otherwise known as Season 3 content, before getting real deep into novel content with Arc 7 and what currently exists of Arc 8, so if you're an anime only or aren't caught up, be on the lookout for when it dip out of the video. Do note that this will all be highly subjective analysis, and at times, characters in this story even straight up disagree with my placements. That's okay though, because it's all for fun. To dive straight in, what issues are facing Lagunica at the current time? First things first, with the wiping out of the royal family, there were some doubts cast on the authenticity of the Dragon Tablet. A piece of stone that was supposed to guide the nation to prosperity, for some reason, did not provide instructions on how to either avoid the illness that took out the royal family, or a way to solve it. Some high-ranking officials were distrusting of it, positing that it could have been the work of a man named Barielle, Priscilla's husband, who held some grudges against the kingdom after taking the fall for a bad skirmish during the Civil War. There is also an underlying sentiment amongst people now that there is no royal family, a fear that if something bad happened, the dragon might not come help, or it might even be an enemy. Additionally, Lagunica has a long-standing problem of racial discrimination. Ever since the calamity that ravaged the world around 400 years ago, it caused Lagunica to take a heavy discriminatory look at demi-humans and their potential association with the Witch of Envy. Tensions would slowly rise over the next 350 years before blowing up into a full-scale civil war, after an alleged incident with border guards and their treatment of demi-humans. The Demi-Human War would last for around 9 years, having moderate back and forth between the Demi-Human Alliance and the kingdom itself, before being essentially crushed within the blink of an eye by the debut of the Sword Saint Teresia von Estrella. The victory of the kingdom led to nothing largely changing. Of course, relations have improved somewhat through time, but as evidenced by the treatment of Emilia throughout the series, the underlying racist sentiment of the nation hasn't really gone anywhere, even at times forcing demi-humans to farm settlements in mountains or woods to live. Lagunica is also no stranger to rampant income inequality, felt as sort of our lens to view the poverty-stricken in ReZero. The people there are forced to steal from one another to survive, to try and make a life for themselves, with the posh and expensive capital looming in the background the entire time. All while dealing with a declining economic state after multiple skirmishes with a neighboring country, Vollachia, which is a whole can of worms on its own, as well as a recent famine that is putting economic strain on the nation as a whole. Distrust of the workings of the nation, extreme racial discrimination, a downtrending economy with ever-increasing poverty, and ever-increasing tensions with its neighboring state. Lagunica has its fair share of issues to address. We are introduced to all of the candidates and their initial platforms in the series' 3rd arc. Crusch Karsten, Anastasia Hoshin, Priscilla Barielle, Emilia, and Felt. Let's go in order from most likely to succeed at this point to most likely to fail. Starting with Crusch Karsten, also known as the Valkyrie, is absolutely by far the frontrunner of the election. House Karsten is one of the most powerful and influential houses in the nation, having served it for multiple generations and being closely related to the late royal family. She is a powerful military and political leader, having bucked gender norms to position herself as an expected head of the house. After dealing with an incident relating to the Great Rabbit, she would become the head of House Karsten, gaining further political clout by including the sword demon Wilhelm in her camp, who had gained notoriety for being linked to the Estrella household, as well as the sword demon love song and the White Whale. Crusch would also develop one of the more radical approaches to policy in the election after the fall of the royal family, the abolition of the Dragon Covenant. She believes that the nation has descended into softness and depravity due to a reliance on a higher power, bringing up how the nation has failed itself in incidents that the dragon wouldn't intervene, such as the Demi-Human War or the failed subjugation of the White Whale 14 years ago that ended up in the death of the Sword Saint. If the nation is to crumble without the dragon, we should become the dragon ourselves. Obviously, as mentioned prior, there is some underlying distrust of the dragon as well as the Dragon Tablet spreading after the fall of the royal family, something Crusch ends up capitalizing on despite the controversy of the statement. She also has the clout to back it up, representing one of the most powerful houses in the nation, having someone who at the pinnacle of his strength rivaled the Sword Saint, and having the best healer in the nation on her side. It's very clear to see why Crusch Karsten ends up being the frontrunner in the election as of Arc 3. In my opinion, Priscilla Barielle would be our runner-up. However, Otto at some point thinks that Anastasia would be, so I would call her a dark horse candidate. Priscilla has a very interesting mix of reputation but also results. She is known as the Bloody Bride, as all of her prior marriages have ended up in tragedy. She is known by some of the Lagunican people as a tragic figure and is said to have a warm charm that makes people smile that has overcome the absurdity of her circumstances to achieve glory. Of course, this perception of hers does not match her actual grating and crude personality. Despite her rude self, after the death of her husband, Barielle, she took over his domain, which would result in unprecedented prosperity, having farms that were otherwise failing have record-breaking harvests for her presence alone. She has no intention of actually doing anything as king, having no particular interest in the kingdom or its subjects, stating that everything in the world belongs to her. She does not want to disturb the harmony of nature. She will maintain and prune, but the world is beautiful as it is. With her on the throne, there will be prosperity. Priscilla is more or less running on precedent. Her campaign slogan might as well be, "Things will be gooder." But considering that she has a reputation for things being gooder when she's in charge, it's one that is sort of hard to deny, and the, quote, "nothing will fundamentally change" attitude of Priscilla could also be widely appealing to the conservative Lagunicans in power, while prosperity in her presence could appeal to the struggling citizens. She is an oddity that I'm not sure how to evaluate at times, but I think that she would be a popular candidate. The candidate, smack dab in the middle, would likely be Anastasia Hoshin. She is the chairman of the Hoshin Trading Company, the largest company in the country, known as Kararagi, making her one of the most powerful people in that nation. Her main appeal to voters would be her economic strength. Considering the nation has fallen upon hard times due to the recent draining of funds from skirmishes with Vollachia and a famine that hit one of Lagunica's likely biggest industries, agriculture, Anastasia has at least one foot in the door due to the potential of her managing Lagunica's economy for the best. She is a very American Dream-esque candidate, stating that everyone has the potential to be greater and to climb the social hierarchy. Whether that is true or not could change in the ReZero world, but regardless, American Dream rhetoric is extremely effective because people like to be told that they can always succeed, rather than being told why they are failing, no matter how true that rhetoric actually is. While she has the appeal of economic success and the bootstraps mentality, she also has a very rough public perception since she hails from Kararagi. There is some speculation amongst the public of Lagunica about election interference, usually about Vollachia since there are rumors that the Council of Sages secretly went there to sign a non-aggression pact. But of course, it's not just Vollachia, and the people are fearful of Western Kararagi influence in this election, even going as far as to ponder if Julius Jaculius, the finest of knights, is a traitor to the crown hoping to aid in handing over Lagunica to a Kararagian asset who claimed that her goal is ownership of the kingdom to sate her greed. Claims of economic restructure will also not address the issues of internal strife or racial discrimination that plagues the nation, likely leaving some voters displeased. For our second to last candidate as of Arc 3, we have Felt, which might be surprising to some people considering that she was a last-second addition to the race, and also is not of a very prestigious background. And to those two primary criticisms, I agree. I think that is why she is in 4th place in a 5-person race. She has extremely little clout of her own, really only being a known name among thieves, and some of the upper class or civilly obsessed nobles will likely not be very fond of her conduct. She has 3 things kind of going for her despite those massive negatives. First is her radical position on absolutely destroying the status quo. She is frequently mischaracterized in the fandom as an anarchist, but that generally goes to show how misused the word anarchist in modern day discourse is. Anarchism is an ideology that rejects all forms of unjust hierarchy, considering the state to be a tool to dominate, being in favor of decentralized democracy and worker ownership. Felt does not really have any of that, because she more or less has zero policy or ideology. What Felt represents to the people of Lagunica is an idea, an outright rejection of the times and of society that has been hoisted up to have one of the loudest voices in the nation. Due to that, she will likely be reasonably popular among the nation's poor, with a lot of the nation also realizing that she has nothing to stand on in terms of policy or ideas outside of wanting to tear down Lagunica, which would likely make quite a few powerful people upset. Something that could bring them back in, however, is her heritage of most likely being the lost child of the Lagunican family, being the only surviving member of the royal family. A lot of traditional people might be fond of the monarchist approach the nation had taken and opt to stick with what was working, and of course, to some of the nationalist or military-driven folk, she has the sword saint in her corner. Reinhard is the most powerful person, period, which also gives her the backing of part of the Estrella household, a name that carries a lot of weight in the nation, as mentioned before during Crusch's section. Felt has a lot of interesting push and pull in all sorts of directions. She pulls in the poor and the working class while pushing away aristocrats and nobles. She pulls in the monarchists while also possibly pushing some away due to the legitimacy of her claim to noble heritage. She pulls in the militaristic or traditionalist civilians by having Reinhard van Estrella as her knight, while pushing those same people away with talks of destroying the mold of the nation. Emilia will be our last place runner, unfortunately for some. She, like Felt, has no background, being known to even fewer people and having most of her clout being garnered by being associated with someone more popular than her. However, Roswell does not necessarily have the same name recognition as Reinhard. While Felt has her radicalism and vows to shake up this broken system, Emilia has also no policies and almost nothing to offer outside of populist messaging about equality, something that Felt herself does but more focused on class divide, which could cast a wider net. Of course, her thoughts on racial discrimination will not fall on deaf ears. Well, to some, but a lot of whatever she says will be disregarded due to her heritage as a silver-haired half-elf, being the only candidate going in with a debuff due to her race. Emilia in Arc 3, to be frank, is just a worse Felt, who was already not doing so hot, in basically every regard, and without Roswell would have absolutely no pieces to play, especially considering her knight is a nobody who makes a fool of himself in the royal capital, getting his ass kicked for his disrespect. The Emilia campaign might as well be the Roswell Almeider's campaign, because despite how kind or sweet she is to people, it will not remove her political weakness. So to recap, at the start of Arc 3, the order is as follows, in terms of who I think shows the most success with regards to Lagunica's voter base as well as its issues. Number 1 is Crusch, number 2 is Priscilla, number 3 is Anastasia, number 4 is Felt, and finally we have Emilia. At the end of Arc 3, some things have changed. First of all, there is a real threat of witch cult terrorism, as Petaljuice and his group have been making visible moves throughout the country. The big changes are with the Crusch camp, Anastasia camp, and the Emilia camp. First of all, Crusch Karsten's memories have been consumed by gluttony, causing her to be a much more reserved version of herself. It is unclear how this will impact her campaign as a whole, as it seems Ferris and Wilhelm are readily available to do damage control whenever. Jumping in when Crusch was being interviewed in the Lagunican paper side story, answering questions she would be unable to about the white whale subjugation. For all three aforementioned camps, they had coordinated in defeating the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, as well as the White Whale. Headed by the Emilia camp's knight, the subjugation of both horrible threats went extremely well, with the Crusch and Emilia camps receiving most of the accolades for their accomplishment. The White Whale is quite the famous beast, having a lot of cultural references in the nation like the aforementioned ballad about Wilhelm and Theresia, so all three camps likely receive quite a few bonus points for killing it, alongside Sloth. Crusch, despite being gluttonied, since the common folk have no idea about that, will likely remain in first place. I can see these events winning some points for Anastasia, but not enough for her to overtake Priscilla for second place. If anything, they are tied for it. Finally, I think that the Emilia camp being mainly responsible for killing these two problem figures would push her over the top to overtake Felt for fourth place, who, to my knowledge, has not been up to much over the events of Arc 3. And this updates our ranking to Crusch in first with a very strong lead, Priscilla in second, Anastasia in third, but creeping up to Priscilla if not tied, and Emilia squeaking into fourth place and Felt dead last. How do things change by the end of Arc 4, or at this point, the end of the anime? Well, to be frank, not much really changes. Of course, a lot of the cast has significant development, like Emilia breaking free from the control others have over her and regaining her own autonomy, but that plays very little into the political forecast thus far. The Emilia camp's accomplishments, however, are freeing the Sanctuary, which to be frank, most Lagunicans really won't give a shit about, nor does the action widely expand her voter base. And the second accomplishment, the killing of the Great Rabbit, is a contested feat that nobody really believes considering the timeline between the whale and the rabbit, and nobody being able to verify that it had been slain at this point in time. The other camps were up to some stuff, however, it mostly becomes clear in Arc 5. This is where the video, as of 2023, is no longer anime-only friendly. If Season 3 is out, you are free to watch this and the Arc 6 section, but until then, you are left out. This is the one and only warning you will get about Season 3 spoilers. Arc 5 opens up with a 1-year time skip, and for the sake of the campaigns, without talking about any accomplishments, we can assume that the passage of time is just a net positive for all campaigns, unless proven otherwise. Like in the instance of Crusch. A year ago, the selection might as well have already been decided, but people started to notice things over the time skip. Rumors have started to spread, her usual confident and assertive personality seemingly having diminished. Her public appearances are dropping, and Felix and Wilhelm can carry her no longer. And in even more devastating news for the campaign, the previous head of the Karsten house, her father, was brought out of retirement and brought back into service. The Emilia camp and the Anastasia camp did not seemingly get up to much of note during the time skip, likely meaning their positions would remain relatively the same. That cannot be said, however, for Priscilla and Felt, who have been making quite a name for themselves. Priscilla completely reined in the local lords of her late husband Liberio's land, bringing in and faltering the anxious regional power holders onto her side all at once. The lands bordering the Wallachian Empire often had to deal with this nation that is frequently adversarial. However, Priscilla was able to pacify the bordering nation, at least with regards to her lands, and helped revitalize her nearby impoverished villages. This proves her competency on two key issues going into the royal selection. The first, and probably most important, being her capability of reform and bringing even the most desolate parts of the nation back to life. and also her handling of foreign policy with regards to the Vollachian Empire, a particularly touchy subject for Lagunica. While I said that all campaigns sort of get a bonus just by virtue of the time skip, I think it's fair to say that Priscilla will get a big one. Finally, Felt has had a big come-up. Often disregarded and ignored even by local nobility, her policy in her region of focusing on outcasts and pariahs, taking in the talented who were sidelined and revolutionizing her territory with her flexible thinking, clued people in on her seemingly innate capability of leadership. She had also decided to not at all rely on her possible background of being a lost noble, focusing solely on her performance as a leader. This is something that will appeal even more to the downtrodden, rejecting a label that is intrinsically tied with the old and only embracing the new. Her high performance has gotten to the point where the local lords can no longer ignore her presence. Felt's time over the time skip has really shown her competence despite being called a filthy poor. Now for the events of Arc 5 themselves. After the raid on Priscilla, let's evaluate how each camp could benefit from the events of Arc 5. Now, there are no sweeping policy decisions here. It's basically just the equivalent of Lagunica's own personal 9/11. Priscilla is left in shambles after an attack by every living archbishop, the effects of gluttony and lust being particularly damaging to the city, leaving behind deformed civilians and forgotten, broken families. Let's start in order from best to worst ranking candidate. Crusch Karsten did absolutely nothing, getting her ass kicked again and now being infected with dragon's blood. Felix participated in healing people, but can't undo the wide-scale damage done to the city, and Wilhelm was off having his own subplot with his wife, meaning the Crusch camp likely will not benefit at all from Arc 5. The Priscilla camp took part in not only the battle against lust, but also the defeat and capture of Wrath, causing the camp to check off another box of Lagunica's political issues that the camp now has clout for. Disregard that a member of the Priscilla camp also took Felt hostage, because the world bends itself to sue Priscilla, I guess. The Anastasia camp participated in the fight against one of the gluttonies, and not much besides that considering Anastasia herself has no fighting capability. Their public perception would actually increase due to Julius's name being eaten, as people would no longer call him a potential traitor to the throne. However, on the flip side, all of the reputation he had garnered by being the finest of knights is also gone, likely making it equal out, or evenly negative now, as he should no longer be in the royal guard, which would hurt the perception of Anastasia camp's knight. The Emilia camp would participate in yet another Sin Archbishop kill, working together with the Felt camp to pummel Regulus hundreds of feet into the earth's crust, until he just sort of dies. This is a pretty big accomplishment for both camps, especially Felt, who was quickly racking up points for her recently perceived political competence. To quickly address Arc 6, while it strengthens characters and puts them through a lot of shit, it has absolutely zero bearing on the royal selection as of now, so we don't really need to talk about it, and instead let's talk about our updated royal selection forecast. With Crusch falling off in terms of public perception, and her lack of participation in the battle for Priscilla, it's only natural for her to finally fall from first place. Anastasia has always been a moderately popular candidate, and with Priscilla skyrocketing in popularity between Arcs 4 and 5, I think it's fair to say that her and Anastasia should be tied for first place, with Crusch falling to a strong second. Felt and Emilia are gaining lots of notoriety for different things. Felt is improving her local region and making a name for herself amongst the lords, while Emilia is getting progressively better at killing shit. I think Felt and Emilia would be neck and neck for third place. A lot of ties this go around, but worry not, some of that will be decided in the upcoming arcs. While Arc 6 itself doesn't really have that much to talk about, we can talk about the implications if the events of the Watchtower were to go public. First, you have Emilia, the person that the general populace considers the reincarnation of Satan, going to the tower that watches over the seal over the real Satan and conquering it. The person everyone thought was the sage is now dead, and Volcanica's brain is melting out of his ears. Radicals can, and absolutely will, spin this against Emilia. Of course, supporters will likely respond that she was going to speak with the sage to save the lives of Priscilla victims, but racists cannot have their positions changed with logic. Secondly, the candidate that is speculated to be a potential Kararagian puppet also went with the reincarnation of Satan to conquer the Watchtower, and with the hit to her reputation with the finest of knights disappearing from the public conscious, if the people of Lagunica indeed thought of the conquering of the Pleiades Watchtower this way, it would be disastrous for her campaign, especially with her lack of feats in the battle for Priscilla. Okay, this is the final disclaimer. We are about to get into very heavy spoilers. If Season 3 has aired, we are about to talk about Season 4 content. You are not safe. If Season 3 hasn't even aired yet and you're an anime only, what's going on, man? What's up? Arc 7 and 8 we will discuss as a kind of collective entity since 8 is a sequel to 7 in a lot of ways, and these are likely the arcs with the biggest political implications since Arc 3. First, it starts with the Emilia camp knight partaking in a small-scale rebellion against the hostile nation of Vollachia on behalf of, as some people know him, some guy, otherwise known as the actual emperor of the nation. As the rebellion expands into full-blown civil war, so too does Lagunica's involvement, when not only the Priscilla camp, but also the Emilia camp gets entirely involved in the fighting. News about a potential crown prince would spread due to the infantilized Subaru, and then to make matters worse, the Anastasia camp would then join the fighting. To put it lightly, 3 of the 5 people running for King of Lagunica are currently participating in foreign affairs. Let's examine it through the lens of the Lagunican people and use real-life politics. As an example, a lot of people in the United States are pretty unhappy with the ballooning military budget as well as foreign intervention, while there are a multitude of issues going on back at home that are seemingly never being fixed due to an incredibly dysfunctional government system. I think you can see where I'm headed with this. As Lagunica faces a plethora of issues, a majority of our candidates are pissing about in Vollachia's civil war. Obviously, from a reader's perspective, we know just how important it is to do that since there is a great disaster that threatens the safety of the world, but civilians are not readers. For Crusch Karsten, I believe that she will gain points from isolationist or anti-militarist folks, ironically only because she is too brain-dead currently to know what a Vollachia is, or whether to intervene in a civil war. Felt would likely gain much the same, gaining even more steam if she has spent her time training to stand among the other candidates on an already very Lagunican-focused platform. The one candidate I believe will have a net neutral gain on favorability is Priscilla. She may be interfering in another nation's business, but she is also Priscilla and most people don't care when she does cruel or evil shit, so I have a hard time believing that she would actually take damage from this. Anastasia should have shade thrown at her for multiple reasons. One, she is participating in Vollachia's civil war, likely using Lagunican assets. Second, she now represents Kararagian interests, being a representative of the Kararagi League of Cities. This should stoke the flames even harder about her being sent by Kararagi to destabilize other nations, Vollachia included. Emilia is in a very rough place. First things first, what is Emilia's platform? She has almost no platform to speak of, and her only accomplishments thus far are military might by killing Sloth, Greed, and the White Whale. While terrorism from the witch cult is a growing issue in Lagunica, she checks only one box on the agenda, and that is her anti-discrimination stance, and instead of developing policy, she is now taking part in the battle for Vollachia. If interpreted uncharitably, people would consider her a warmonger using her might to further Lagunican values in Vollachia. If interpreted charitably, people would question why she is helping a nation of bloodthirsty savages that practice racial extermination against mole and wolf people when there are more pressing issues at home and her entire platform is anti-discrimination. Obviously, part of Emilia's political ineffectiveness is her playing catch-up with the other candidates and also being in frequent life-threatening situations. But again, we as readers know this, not the millions of people in Lagunica. So let's examine the royal selection standing with Arc 7 and Arc 8 context. Priscilla is number 1 now, and probably just by a technicality. This would remain the same even if people did push back against her involvement with Vollachia. Second place would likely go to Felt, one of 2 politicians who has remained in the country over this past month and worked with the people of the nation. I believe the more time she spends not getting involved in hijinks, the likelier it is that the people around her would prefer her. While everyone is out blowing up Vollachia, Felt is positioned to gain massive ground by being a candidate who has prioritized the well-being of the people of Lagunica since day one. Isolationist, anti-interventionist, and the working people would be quite fond of this development, since I can only see the intervention in Vollachia being a bad thing politically for people. I think third place would be a two-way tie between Crusch and Anastasia. While Crusch is indeed focusing on Lagunica, there is also not much going on in her brain right now, and the few months between Arcs 5 and 8 would likely not change that. I think that she would gain a few passive points for her lack of interference in Vollachia, but would not be enough to stop the draining of her reputation. Anastasia, I was initially going to have tied for second place, but I think her involvement with Kararagi could really turn a lot of people off, especially now that she is officially representing their council, and now that she is involved with Vollachia. Coupled with her lack of feats in Priscilla, I think Anastasia's campaign has taken a lot of damage. I do not think that this damage is irreparable, however, it's just a matter of how she would go about it, and I think it would be relatively easy for her to break free from the tie with Crusch to solidly take third place, especially depending on the actual in-universe response to her being with Kararagi. Lastly, Emilia. She just has too little going on right now, and little involvement in the state of affairs of her actual nation. With 4 arcs of the story left, not including Arc 8, she needs to develop some political competency fast. She has likely gained a couple of points with nationalists and big fans of the military, but not enough to outweigh the rest. She needs to achieve a very, very good outcome in Vollachia to possibly rectify some of the damage done by the intervention in the first place. And while I do believe the intervention will be a net negative at the end of the day, her forming an official deal with Vincent Vollachia to fight for the nation could start to lean in a good direction. Especially if news about the zombies overtakes news about the Civil War, something that there is precedent for not happening, since the zombies in the Lagunican Civil War are merely a footnote. So, to put it simply, Priscilla, Felt, Crusch equals Anastasia, and then Emilia. If you want my personal favorability list, it would look a bit different. Felt, Emilia, Priscilla, Crusch, and Anastasia. You might be surprised that I have Emilia so high considering I've been ragging on her the entire video, but it's quite rare for a person vying for power to actually be a good person with a good moral compass, so I think she's neat. Let's do a quick bonus round for Vollachia. How will Vollachian politics work out going forward? I believe that Vincent could get a lot of blowback and be considered a Lagunican puppet, considering the already existent criticism of his peaceful reign, and now being the first emperor to form a pact with someone from Lagunica, he looks very weak to the average Vollachian who prioritizes strength. especially since from their perspective, the second the general population hears something about a successor of Vincent's vying for the throne, he calls in the support of two other nations, Lagunica and Kararagi. Vincent has a very tough road ahead of him, and so too do a lot of these candidates. It's very possible all of the stuff I talk about here has zero relevance to the actual plot, but oh well, it was fun. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the funny YouTube algorithm. You can also become a YouTube member, which gives you access to behind-the-scenes content, a badge on comments and livestream chats, as well as the use of emotes and videos before their actual release. You can also check the description for socials like Twitter, where I'm objectively correct all the time, and Discord, where we talk about ReZero, My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen, and stuff like that. That's about it though. Thank you for watching. See ya.